Hi, my name is Mike. I'm one of the pastors here at Kings Harbor, and thank you so much for utilizing this resource. Our hope for you in anything that we provide is that you would expect transformation, that we could demonstrate love towards you because of the love of God demonstrated to us, that you would have the faith stirred in you to deal with obstacles and to see opportunities, and that ultimately that the kingdom of God would be revealed in every area of your life. And so our hope with this resource is that the Lord would speak to you powerfully.
As you turn to John chapter 5, this will be our final week in our series, Responding Courageously. Each week we've kind of walked this journey of, what does it look like for us to live that value? How are we doing that corporately in this particular moment? But also, I hope it's been stirring you how you might do that individually. And as we jump in, this final message, maybe the best way I can shape it is to just tell you an experience that I went through recently. So back in July, I was speaking at a camp, Hume Lake, speaking to adults. And so depending on the day, most of the time I had some freedom during the day, and then I was speaking during the evening. There was a few days in there that I had to preach in the morning and in the evening, but that was circumstantial. And so particularly the Tuesday of that week, I only had to speak that evening. And so when I'm usually gone on a trip like that, I try to take advantage of that time and maybe get some things done that I wouldn't normally get done in the office. And so I'm working even though I'm not at my desk at work. And this particular day, there's a third-party vendor, a software company that we use as a church, and I was trying to maximize what we were doing. I was trying to change some things with what we had. And so I started that morning at 8 o'clock. I got up, I did a walk, I got a banana, and after I got done with all that, I was like, okay, I'm going to get this done. And I was thinking this is going to be the first hour of my day, and then I can go be spiritual before I have to go preach. And so I jump online. I'm trying to call this company. You can't call them. And so you have to work through a chat. And so I'm chatting with the people and I'm saying, I'm trying to make this one customization to our service. And the first person was like, well, just hit this button, this button, this button. So I hit this button, this button, this button, and the customization don't work. So I jump back on the chat because you can't call anybody and reiterate everything that happened. And they're like, oh, well, the reason that you can't do that is you have the essential plan. You got to upgrade to the standard plan. $13 more a month. I'm like, if it gives us more flexibility in what we're trying to do, I'll do it. It's not that much money. So I upgrade to the $13. I do everything that they tell me to do. Hit this button, this button, this button. It still doesn't work. I jump back online again, reiterate everything that I've already told them, and plus that I've upgraded to the standard plan. And after I reiterate all of those things, they're like, oh, we're not really sure why you can't do it. And I'm like, well, can I get on a phone call with somebody? They're like, no, for a phone call, you got to upgrade to our premium plan. The premium plan is $250 a month more than the standard plan. So at this point, I'm both angry and trying to be a good steward of the Lord's money. And those two things together are a powerful motivator. So it's like, I'm getting something today. So I type it, I'm like, hey, here's what I've been through. So this ends up going from 8 o'clock in the morning till 4 p.m. in the afternoon. And at one point I finally got somebody on the phone because I called their other lines, their sales line. And so they're like, oh, do you want to buy our product? No, I don't want to buy your product. I want to learn how to do X. And so one lady was like, yeah, you can do that. I was like, really? She's like, yeah. She was like, you've already upgraded to the standard plan, but you actually get 30 days free at the premium plan, so you should just upgrade to the premium plan. Let me put you over to my supervisor. Her supervisor gets on the phone. His name's not going to be named, but I do remember his name because I'm petty. And I tell him what she said, and he was like, we've never done that, and we can't help you. So at this point, all levels of sanctification are gone. I'm not trying to honor the Lord. I'm not trying to make peace. I don't care what that book was called. I just need you to help me do my thing. So I get online and the customer service specialist who deals with angry people. And that's the worst job in the world, but she got me that day. And so I began telling her all the things that I've been through, the number of chat calls I've been on, all of those things. And when she was like, well, here's what we can do. We can give you a free month of premium. Or not free month of premium, free month of standard. And I was like, well, wait a minute. Why don't you just give me 1 day of premium? I just need to talk to somebody on the phone. She's like, we can't do that. I was like, so your business model is that you would give me a month free for $100 versus a prorated $350 down to like $35 per day. Like, you would rather do that than actually help me the way that I needed to be helped. And she's like, sorry, I can't do anything for you. Praise the Lord that this was via chat and not on the phone, because I might have said some things I shouldn't have said. If when I typed them, she might have just thought I was a sloppy typer, and so she let it go. But I was angry. And the reason I say that to you is that was one day. Imagine if you multiplied that feeling of, I need help and there's nobody to help me, by 38 years. Because the text that we're going to look at today introduces that level of problem. And so we're going to be in John chapter 5, verses 1 through 18. And here's the main idea. Seeing Jesus bring freedom to our moment means we are willing to risk acceptance and approval. And so in verses 1 through the first part of 9, we're just going to see something that's a long time coming. And then in the latter half of 9 through verse 18, we're going to see this odd reception of Jesus. Let me pray, then we'll jump in. So Jesus, thank you. Thank you for your word. Thank you for the opportunity to immerse ourselves in it. And I do pray, just as I said a moment ago at the end of worship, that there would be this aligning of our hearts with your word and with your spirit and with your power. So would you do that far beyond my ability to string sentences together? It's in your matchless name I pray. Amen. John chapter 5, starting in verse 1, would say this. After this, a Jewish festival took place, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. By the sheep gate in Jerusalem, there is a pool called Bethesda in Aramaic, which has 5 colonnades or 5 porches. Within these lay a large number of the disabled, blind, lame, and paralyzed. One man was there who had been disabled for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and realized that he had been there a long time, he said to him, "Do you want to get well?" "Sir," the disabled man answered, "I have no one to put me in the pool when the water is stirred up, but while I'm coming, someone goes down ahead of me." "Get up," Jesus told him. "Pick up your mat and walk." Instantly, the man got well and picked up his mat and started to walk. Now, there's a few things here that I think are important that are a little bit of a pretext. If you're reading in a physical Bible or maybe reading even in an app, maybe the thing that you see that's the header right before you read this text is it probably says the third sign of Jesus. As you read through the book of John, John is intentionally trying to use these signs to show you that that Jesus is the Messiah. And so the first ones are a little bit more explicit. This one's not as much so. But this is what he would call the third sign, or at least what theologians would call the third sign. That also means that we probably need to understand a little bit of the pretext. And so not only is this a significant third sign, but what are the other things that have happened before this? And so literally in just the chapter before, if you remember at the very start of this series, we were in John chapter 4, and we saw the picture of this woman who, with all the circumstances of life, had ended up at this well with Jesus and could have been shamed by Jesus, but instead was received by Jesus, was encouraged by Jesus, and was empowered by Jesus to go back into her town and confess that she had met the Messiah. Shortly after that, Jesus goes back to Galilee, and when he gets into Galilee, there is the royal official whose son is sick. The royal official comes out to Jesus, asks Jesus, "Hey, can you heal my son?" Jesus says, "Go, your son's been made well." On his way home, he gets the people that work for him bump into him and say, "Hey, your son's well." And he's like, "When did that happen?" And then when he tells them, it's the very same hour that Jesus had said to him that his son would be well. And this would be called the second sign. Just for sake of completion, because you're wondering, the first sign is when he turns the water into wine in chapter 2. So right now, John seems to be painting this picture that when Jesus does something, it allows people to see the fullness of who he is. So as we enter into this story, and you've already read part of the text, that would be some of your assumption about the text, but let me build out a little bit about what's going on, because I think it's really important for you to see not just the bottom line of the story, but all the story beats that get you there. So one of the things that I think is really significant is that Jesus is going into Jerusalem during some festival. It's not the first time that he's been in Jerusalem. In fact, back chapter 2, he goes into Jerusalem for Passover. This festival is not named, but what you can assume is that for those who were there at the temple, that this was a moment of high spirituality. These are high holy days, and he happens to be there during that season. And when he shows up during that season, he enters this place that has a pool near the temple called Bethesda, and there's a multitude of people. And that would have been true no matter what the season is, but theologians think that it probably was an increased number of people who were sitting around this pool with their disabilities, hoping that they might be able to become whole. And so as Jesus walks up, he finds a man who's been disabled for 38 years. I think that distinction is even really important because oftentimes when the Bible talks about what's wrong with somebody, they'll talk about that thing has happened since birth. There's a parallel story in John chapter 9 where there's a man who's been born or who's been blind since he was born, and the scriptures make that clear. And so what it leads me to believe is that distinction of 38 years is not to say that the man is 38 years old, but that this has been his condition for the last 38 years. And I just don't want to miss how difficult it is to have tasted something and then lose it. Think about how difficult it is that this man was at one point, had the agency of his body, was full-bodied enough that if he wanted to get in the pool that he could, but then something happened 38 years ago and he's been broken and not able to do it ever since. Maybe that doesn't hit you because you are able-bodied, but just think about ways that maybe you used to know something and now you don't know that thing anymore. Think about how broken and frustrating and discouraging that it is to have once tasted peace of mind and all of a sudden that's gone. How difficult it is to once tasted health in your body, but all of a sudden that's gone. To once have tasted a healthy marriage, but all of a sudden now that's gone. And so for 38 years, this guy has been sitting in the brokenness of knowing that he used to be able to, but now he can't anymore. And Jesus walks up to him and asks him, Do you want to get well? Now, I know last week Jesus was a little snarky. And he said, how long do I have to be with you guys? Y'all don't have any faith? I don't think that's the same situation here. This question that Jesus is asking is not a rebuke, and in fact, it's not even uncommon. There's another text where he will ask a very similar thing. And so Mark chapter 10, he's on the road to Jerusalem, and there's a man named Bartimaeus who's blind, who's calling out, even though people are like, you need to be quiet. And he calls out, and he gets Jesus' attention. Jesus walks over to him, and verse 51 of Mark 10 would say this. Then Jesus answered him, what do you want me to do for you? Bartimaeus' response, Rabboni, the blind man said to him, I want to see. That question is not a question of, why are you stuck like this? How come you haven't done something else? How come you've been in this situation for so long? Like Jesus sees him and Jesus goes to him. And I love the fact that Jesus initiates all of this, going to him, talking to him, and ask him the question, do you want to get well? Not as an indictment that you haven't done enough yet, but as an invitation to engage the one that can bring the healing. And his response is, sir, I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up, but while I'm coming, someone goes down ahead of me. Now, if you were paying close attention to what we were reading, one of the things you'll notice is that you don't have a verse 4 in this text. If you're like, wait a minute, what? I didn't mess up. We didn't mess up. Our production team didn't mess up. There's just not a verse 4 there. Now, there are some manuscripts that have a verse 4, and that verse 4 would explain that this body of water, that they believed that an angel would come down and stir the water, and whoever jumped into the water first, that they were the person to get the healing. And so when this man makes this statement, like this is not foreign to that day and age, that there were bodies of water, pools that were considered places of healing, and people would try and get themselves into that healing water that they might be okay. And so he confesses, I've been trying to get down there and I don't have anybody to help me. Like I just want to lay out two things that are heartbreaking and disturbing in this moment. One, that healing was based on meritocracy. Who's good enough to get to it? Who's fast enough, who's agile enough, who's able enough to get what they need. That somehow the thought about healing was that if you can get yourself there, if you're strong enough to literally pull yourself up by your own bootstraps and get yourself to the place of healing, then you'll be made well. And Jesus stepping in and offering this defies all of that. But the second thing is the statement that he makes that I have no one. It's one thing to be broken. It's one thing to be bound. It's one thing to be struggling. It's another thing to have to do that all by yourself. And for him to say that in this moment, and I'm thinking about those that are around him that are also disabled, that they are blind and lame and paralyzed, like they don't have the agency to help him either. So he's surrounded by people in the same situation, hoping that somebody will come by and help him get down there. And maybe today's that day because Jesus stops and has a conversation with him. But Jesus doesn't scoop him up in his arms and carry him to the pool. Jesus says, get up. Can you think about how much faith it would take to get up when somebody says that? Like the ability to say, all right, I'm going to trust you. And Jesus says, get up and take your mat. As if to say, you're not going to be here anymore, so get your stuff and keep it moving. Like I'm setting you free. And it says instantly the man got well, picked up his mat, and started to walk. And it leads me to believe that neither merit nor agency are requirements for the mercy of Jesus. Like I just want you to know that when Jesus moves on your behalf, it's not because you're able enough or worthy enough to receive it. Like Jesus is not looking and saying, well, have you proved your worthiness to me? Or were you the first one to get my attention? But he's just merciful because he is. Like he just sees this guy and goes to him and gives him this mercy. Like the guy's one response isn't even that great a response. It doesn't like there's no one that can help me in the water, but maybe you, sir, have the power to help me. He's just actually just laying out complaints. He's just calling customer service saying, look, I've talked to 37 people since 8 a.m. this morning and ain't nobody helped me out yet. And so certainly it doesn't seem like his faith would make him an eligible candidate, nor would his ability, and yet Jesus is willing to offer him mercy. And then the second half of verse 9, things begin to take a turn. Now that day was the Sabbath. So the Jews said to the man who had been healed, this is the Sabbath. The law prohibits you from picking up your mat. He replied, the man who made me well told me, pick up your mat and walk. So let me translate that for you. What had happened was there was this guy, and it ain't my fault. Who is this man who told you, pick up your mat and walk? They asked him. But the man who was healed did not know who it was because Jesus had slipped away into the crowd that was there. After this, Jesus found him in the temple and said to him, see, you are well. Do not sin anymore so that something worse doesn't happen to you. The man went and reported to the Jews that it was Jesus who had made him well. Therefore, the Jews began persecuting Jesus because he was doing these things on the Sabbath. Jesus responded to them, my Father is still working, and I am working also. This is why the Jews began trying all the more to kill him. Not only was he breaking the Sabbath, but he was even calling God his own Father, making himself equal to God. So if you're like, man, did the record just skip right there? Like, it's not supposed to end like that. So I just want to walk through again what we're seeing. So this man has been miraculously healed, has been there for a long time. I imagine is certainly identifiable, at least enough that they knew that he wasn't where he used to be. He picks up his mat, and the first thing that those authorities will say to him is, why are you picking up your mat on the Sabbath? And so one of the spoken derivatives of the law would say that you should not work on the Sabbath. And to carry your elements from one place to another was seen as being laborious, therefore being work. And so if you're doing work on the Sabbath, there's something wrong. And so here's their approach to this guy. Guy who could not walk for 38 years, all of a sudden starts walking, and they're like, you ain't keeping the rules, bro. Like, I don't know if they just missed it, but they were so concerned with their tradition in a holy season, on the holiest day of a holy season, that it's the Sabbath day, that this day is reserved for rest in the Lord and resting from your labors. And this is a season where we've all come to be part of recognizing the Lord. And on this day, how dare you do something that would break our tradition and our culture? And so he blame shifts and says, it wasn't me, it was the guy that healed me. And they're like, well, who is he? And he doesn't know. He's not lying. He has no idea. Jesus didn't tell him his name. Jesus slips through the crowd, disappears. And then Jesus comes back and finds him in the temple. And Jesus like, hey, you asked to be well. Look, man, you're well. Now, don't sin anymore lest something worse happens to you. Whoa. So now we got a problem. Jesus, are you saying that the reason that this guy couldn't walk was because he was sinful? Are you saying that the reason that sometimes we go through disease and brokenness and all of these things in our world is because of sin? I think Jesus does think that. In fact, I said it to you a few weeks ago, and I'll say it again. There's a danger when we reduce the human experience to primarily physical or spiritual. Souls and bodies are deeply intertwined and more complex than we would like to admit. So I do think that sin has physical ramifications. I also think that's not even the point of the text. Because if you were to continue to read this, Jesus would begin to start talking about what it looks like to be condemned because of sin. And his concern is not whether your legs work or not. His concern is whether you are going to be in right standing with God or receiving the wrath and judgment that your sin is due. And so, yes, maybe that was the cause. But more so, sin is much more detrimental than anything that could just be a physical effect for a short period of time, that it has eternal consequences that damage your soul. And Jesus is trying to point him to that. And here's what's interesting to me. In 2 conversations with Jesus, at no point has this dude expressed gratitude or belief. In fact, the next few verses that you read, it says that he goes back and he goes and tells the Jewish authorities who Jesus was. And I can't say I know that this is the case, but I'll tell you, I was very tempted to title this message, Snitches Get Stitches. And here's the reason why. Because John's doing a thing here. John is trying to paint this picture of when people see Jesus do his work, that they believe him, they trust him, and they impact other people around them. And so let me just give you a few texts to prove my case. Here's the first sign at the wedding at Cana, John 2, verse 11. Jesus did this, turning the water to wine, the first of his signs in Cana of Galilee. He revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. Or I talked about the woman at the well earlier being part of the pretext, John 4, 39 through 42. Now, many Samaritans from that town believed in him because of what the woman said when she testified. He told me everything I ever did. So when the Samaritans came to him, they asked him to stay with them, and he stayed there 2 days. Many more believed because of what he said, and they told the woman, we no longer believe because of what you said, since we have heard for ourselves and know that this really is the Savior of the world. Or the second sign, the healing of the official son. So John chapter 4, verse 50. Go, Jesus told him. Your son will live. The man believed what Jesus said to him and departed. While he was still going down, his servants met him saying that his boy was alive. He asked them at what time he got better. Yesterday at 1 p.m, the fever left him, they answered. The father realized that this was the very hour at which Jesus had told him, your son will live. So he himself believed, along with his whole household. And this guy certainly tells people about who Jesus is, but it don't create belief. That if John is trying to show this picture that when Jesus does something, that it causes people to believe, it's interesting because I talked about John 2, I talked about John 4, I didn't talk about John 3, because in John 3, Nicodemus has a conversation with Jesus, but Nicodemus doesn't walk away convinced of who Jesus is. And it's interesting that the most religious, the most traditional, the closest to the center of their faith could not see him for the way that they were supposed to see him. And so I don't know that this dude was snitching. But I know that the way that Jesus responded to it is it certainly feels like it's a rejection. Because then they go to Jesus and they say, how dare you do this on the Sabbath? I'm just going to say, you know what you don't do? You don't get into a fight with somebody who can make people's legs work, for fear that they can also make people's legs not work. You'd be like, you know what, you probably shouldn't have done that, but I ain't going to say nothing. I'm just going to think it. And he says to them, but my Father's working, so therefore I'm still at work. Like, he's not just saying, well, but God does these things, and so therefore why aren't we doing those things? He is saying that. But he's also saying, what you're seeing me doing is what the Father is doing. And so then it says that they wanted to kill him all the more. So I don't know if that dude was snitching, but it certainly feels like they rejected Jesus because of what he said. And so I wrote it this way. Don't let the potential criticism or rejection keep you from fully responding to Jesus. Like, he had already had a conversation with these authorities. They begin to ask questions, and all of a sudden he gets back in front of Jesus, and this is an opportunity to even to press in more, to know him better, to walk away with a level of belief. We don't see any belief from him in this text. We don't see him sharing faith from a posture of, this is what God has done for me. You must know him also. It seems like he shrinks back because it doesn't feel like it's going to fit people's approval. It feels like it's going to garner criticism, maybe even persecution. And he misses knowing Jesus more fully because he shrinks back to what he's always known. So what do we do with that? Seeing Jesus bring freedom to our moment means we're willing to risk acceptance and approval. Or maybe a better way to say it is, we have the courage to be rejected. I'm not an economist. I'm not a financial advisor. I do not give financial advice. That's the tiny print at the bottom of the screen, just in case you're wondering. If you're watching online, there's no tiny print on the bottom of the screen. That was just a verbal disclaimer. But I do want to give you a kingdom investment strategy. By every measurable or observable measurement, this healing was a bad investment. Jesus does it anyway. Like, just think about it with me for a second. There doesn't seem to be a lot of fruit here. Like, it doesn't cause this ripple effect of all these people who have been lame and blind and paralyzed, that they all of a sudden have faith in Jesus. It doesn't cause these Jewish authorities to rethink their persecution strategy. It doesn't even seem like the person who's most directly affected walks away with this level of response to Jesus that we would assume and expect. Like, if you're going to expend your energy, your effort, your talent, your power on something, you're supposed to get the deepest ROI that you can possibly get, return on investment that you possibly can get. And this guy's not that. He's not even close. And yet Jesus does it anyway. And it seems like there are moments when Jesus says that I do this because it's what I do, not because the circumstances force me to do it. That I saw someone that was bound and unable to move in the way that they would have desired, or maybe even the way that they used to, and I'm going to set him free, even if he doesn't follow after me. As if to say, there are no guarantees in this kingdom work. That you don't get to look at a portfolio of things that you can do and like, I'm going to pick that one because it's got the highest yield. I'm going to pick that one because if I hang on long enough, it's going to mature into something. Like, we don't even get an indication that later on in the text that this guy suddenly turned around and all of his household and like his tribe comes to faith. We don't ever hear about this guy again. We don't know that there's any return on the investment. And yet Jesus is willing to do it anyways. Quit looking for guarantees on what Jesus is calling you to. Quit assuming that the way that you're supposed to make this choice is that whatever pays the highest dividend for your efforts is what God's calling you to. But the reality is that the kingdom would invite us to make investments because it's just what the king is doing. This is Jesus' statement. You caught me doing what I'm doing because it's what my Father's doing right now. It's what my Father's drawing me into and calling me into right now. My Father highlighted this guy. I saw him and I went to him and I did what the Father asked me to do. And my prayer for us is that we would respond with the exact same courage in our day. And so the very practical and tangible way that we've been inviting you to do that is in the way that we've been setting up Dan to launch full-time into Harbor Rock. This is an opportunity for kingdom investment, and there are no guarantees. He sat with us last week and told stories of people who had attempted to go through recovery and didn't. They lost their life, as well as people who never entered in and lost their life. There are no guarantees that what he's going to do is going to work. But we don't invest because we got guarantees in the kingdom. We invest because the Lord calls us to it. And that's why a couple of weeks ago when we started this conversation about what the Lord is calling you to give, I said, hey, don't hit a number yet because I want you to pray. I don't want you to do what you can do out of your own agency. I want you to hear what the Father's doing and enter in and invest in that way. Some of you, the Lord has already given you a clear number. I'm just telling you, my job today is to change that number. My job is to push you to a place that says, man, what would it look like to have the type of courage to invest in something the way that the Lord would invest in something? What would it look like for me to step out on a limb and make this kind of faith pledge that says, okay, Lord, I trust you. I don't know if I'll ever even see return on my investment, but you will. You will accomplish the work that you set out to do, and you're asking me to be a part of it. May what I'm doing be the same thing that the Father is doing right now. So I just want to invite you. You see the opportunity on your screen, whether it's the QR code in-house or online, you can type in that address. It's also in the notes, our sermon notes. And my prayer is that you've been praying and the Lord has been stirring. I pray that we continue to do the same. And we'll have opportunities all throughout this week. And then late in the week, we'll never close it, but we're going to calculate the number. And next week, I get to jump up and celebrate with you what the Lord is doing through your generosity, through your kingdom investment. And then I want to end here. This week, I don't know, I'm going to just tell you how the sausage gets made. And so our team on Mondays at 9:30 gathers and we begin to study through the text. And they say in preaching that for every minute that you preach, you should study 1 hour. And so if I preach for 40 minutes, I should do 40 hours of work. I get to cheat because I get to use everybody else's work. And so it's like I get like 25 hours just gifted to me. And so the team comes in and we begin to think through the text and we begin to wrestle with questions and talk through all of that. And as we were doing that, like it began to like stir in me, like, man, how awful would it be to sit in church and hear this text and then walk away saying I mentally assent to what the text says, but I didn't get to encounter Jesus. Like, can you think about what it would have been like on that high holy day? I don't know which one it was. It doesn't seem like it was Passover because they usually tell us that it was Passover. But maybe it was the Feast of Booths. And so this was to celebrate that the Lord met them in the wilderness with his personal presence. Like, to be thinking that you are celebrating that the Lord meets you with his personal presence and that yet you miss the personal Jesus. To be thinking about moments like Yom Kippur where there's this atonement for sin and thinking that God is going to forgive all these things and the one who's able to forgive all these things is right there in your midst and you miss him. How terrible would it be to sing holy forever, that your name is the highest, your name is the greatest, and yet not encounter him? How terrible would it be to say that my heart is centered on you, Jesus, but yet I don't know how to experience you, Jesus? And so I don't want to be like the officials in the text that say, you can be in the place where religious activity is going on, but we're not going to make space for you to encounter Jesus. So I just feel this burden this morning. I don't know what your 38 years is. I don't know what's your thing that you feel bound by. But I just want to make space for you to bump into Jesus this morning. This man couldn't walk. Maybe you're crippled with anxiety. I just want you to be set free by Jesus this morning. Maybe you are bound by addiction and sin. And I do believe that there are the necessity of having community around you and having accountability around you. But I also know that just in a moment, that if the Lord wants to set you free, that the Lord will set you free. And maybe you are despondent and depressed. And I just want to see the Lord set you free. There are no guarantees. But I just don't want to get so comfortable with you being stuck where you are that we step past you to get other things done so we can continue our religious ceremony and miss the opportunity to know Jesus in the midst of your challenges. Let me say this. I said it to the staff, and you're not on staff, but I'm going to say it to you anyways. There's an author named Jonathan Malm, and Jonathan Malm writes books, but he also makes funny social media content. And this week he released a short reel of him sitting there like he was in church, and the text said, you want to respond to the altar call, but you're on staff. And so he kind of had this ashamed look on his face, like, I can't respond to that. And so it's like, yeah, like if the pastor's preaching on embezzling money and you're on staff, you probably shouldn't respond to that altar call. But sometimes I think we're so worried about approval and status that we would sit there and suffer as opposed to being set free by Jesus. Don't do that this morning. I just believe that Jesus wants to meet you, and you don't have to do it alone. In a moment, our prayer team, our staff, our elders are going to be available to you. And they don't have magic words to pray, but they're going to point you to Jesus. They're going to sit with you in it. So I'm going to pray in just a moment. And after I say amen, I just want to invite you, if the Spirit is drawing you to respond, to stand to your feet and to find someone up here to pray with you and for you. Let me pray. So Jesus, I'm just convinced that you see us, and I'm convinced that you want to allow us to encounter you this morning. I pray that for the person that feels bound in any number of things, that this morning that they would hear, do you want to get well? Not as an indictment, not as a rebuke, but as an invitation. That today might be the day. I don't want to be able to speak about you and not meet you. So would you meet us here? Not because we merit it, not because we were able to conjure it, but because you are merciful. Would you transform us? It's in your matchless name I pray. Amen and amen. The prayer team is coming. Would you respond to the Lord?
Thanks so much for checking out this message from Kings Harbor. We would love to connect with you. If you go to kingsharbor.org/hello and fill out a short connect card, that allows us the opportunity to follow up with you. Also, if this message has been a blessing to your life, we believe that the Lord wants to rule and reign in every part of who we are. That means our time, our talent, our treasure. And so if this has been a blessing, we would ask that you would consider contributing back to the ministries of Kings Harbor so we can continue to bless and help people in the same way that we hope we have done for you. With that in mind, we want you to know that our heart towards you and our heart towards the world around us is that we want to be a love-forward people. And we're praying that you would join us in that.